This is Autohaus Z, and today I have with me
Grant with Battle Grudge.
And today, what are we looking at?
Today, we've got a rare opportunity to look at a dry sump system from MRP. And the reason why I say it's a rare opportunity is because we normally don't stock this item, but we have a customer that is racing in an N2 series in Japan that actually bought a couple of these units. So we wanted to take advantage of the opportunity and show you guys what the parts look like and kind of talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of running a dry sump set up for your 4AG or 7AG engine.
And MRP has a custom power steering solution to run in tandem with this kit. Alright Grant, why don't we see what this kit includes?
Well, we can start on the right side. We've got a 6-liter oil container that you can place anywhere in the car, is that right?
Yeah, so one of the advantages, which we'll talk about later, is that this 6-liter baffled aluminum tank can actually mount anywhere inside the vehicle to both help with center of gravity and also weight distribution inside your race car.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason why the plumbing is not included, because it gives you flexibility in mounting this wherever you want. We also have a Moroso, let's use this pointer here. We've got a Moroso filter block off plate here, which you guys can see. This will mount onto the block and it allows you to start to hook up your oil fitting directly to the block. And this will feed into the dry sump system. Then in the middle we've got the dry sump pan itself. This is made out of steel. It's got some large AN fittings on the bottom of it for the pickups, and you can see there's a baffle inside the pan. And this will help to keep the windage losses low by keeping that oil away from the crankshaft and keeping it into the outlets of the pan to go into the dry sump pump. And we also have a 3-stage billet pump here, complete with the pulley for the cog belt. And Zico, why don't you tell them more about this pump?
Cool, so 3-stage pump. 2 of these ports actually probably scavenge the oil from the wet sump, and then one of these ports will direct oil back into our main oil tank. Also in this kit is included a Moroso vacuum gauge.
What do you need that for?
I'm not actually sure.
Okay.
I'm not actually sure.
Damn it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not actually sure why you need a vacuum gauge on your dry sump system.
So I think it has to do with you don't want to pull too much vacuum, because then you could, what's the problem? You can actually suck things past the piston pins into the oil system or something,
so,
right?
Okay, so yeah, you can too much vacuum on the crankcase is probably a bad thing too, because same thing with forced induction cars where they blow the oil past the rings.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing, with too much crankcase vacuum, you could probably suck oil past the rings, even probably suck some of the crankcase ventilation hoses closed, right?
Oh yeah. I see. So it probably lets you keep an eye on how much vacuum you're building.
Yeah, so this is probably a safety item too.
That's good to know.
Yeah. All right. 4AG Ross high performance harmonic balancer.
This thing's really awesome, guys. I don't know if you can see this in the camera, but it's got the crank degrees, I'm assuming laser etched right onto this pulley. And it's just a really nice unit. All the machining looks really nice. The hardware looks nice. We fit on some of the pieces earlier and everything fit like a glove. Why would someone want a harmonic balancer versus, like, I don't know, a solid pulley?
Yeah, that's definitely a very controversial question. So engines naturally have a harmonic frequency and unwanted harmonic vibrations that can actually cause damage throughout both your engine and then all the way back to your rear diff, all the way through your drive line. So that's why from the factory, majority of factory cars are harmonically dampened so that they dampen out those harmful and unwanted engine vibrations.
You know, it's funny, I'm learning today that you're not really getting the pulley because you're necessarily trying to protect the engine, you're trying to protect the rest of the drivetrain.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
okay. Yeah. So you just talked about the pulley, we talked about the vibration, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And speaking of the belt, we've got the belt and this cool gear here, which fits in really nicely right into the center of this pulley, and there's a woodruff key in here that locks in, and then you've got your really fat cog belt that's going to go right on here and drive the pump, which is going to sit next to the pulley.
I was going to say that was a very satisfying snap when this thing snapped into place.
Yeah, this feels great.
So also included in this MRP kit is this 2-liter race breather can with a magnetic filter.
So why would you need this in addition to this tank?
So just like a wet sump system, you don't want a bunch of windage and aerated oil back into your engine. So what happens is the pump will scavenge oil and put it into this tank where the air and oil are separated, and finally when you have solid oil, the oil is put back into the main sump.
Gotcha. So is that kind of like a catch can reverse, or?
Similar idea to a catch can, except we are taking oil that might be aerated and we're putting solid.
Yeah, because like on a catch can, you just want clean air, right? You leave the oil behind.
Yeah.
And this one, we want to leave the air behind, take this oil, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. What else do we have here?
So the last main part of this kit is this pump idler tensioner with bracket.
That thing's slick.
Yeah, so again, this mounts on the exhaust side of the engine, probably just like that. And this is the tensioner for the dry sump pump belt.
So this tensioner bracket is going to mount the pump to your block. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. And you know, one other thing I really liked about this is MRP is using a nice coil bearing, which is one of our favorite brands of bearings. They are an OEM supplier for a lot of manufacturers, so it's really nice to see the little parts using high quality bearings and for the rotating parts of this kit.
All right, so why don't we talk about some advantages of running a dry sump system on your 4AG or possibly 7AG. So I will just read off our notes. At high RPMs, the engine actually moves too much oil, which causes aeration of the oil and for the oil pump relief valve to constantly bypass oil.
So that's like a loss, right?
Yeah, that's a loss. We are creating motion and that energy is being lost because the bypass is open. Yeah.
And you can't control the oil pump speed on a traditional oil pump on the front of the engine. So if you are revving the engine really high, that oil pump is going just as fast as your engine. So you're forcing a lot of oil through the bypass and then back into the system. And it's just like a wasted energy, right?
Exactly. And then you may not need that amount of oil volume at that RPM. Plus at that RPM, because again, like you said, the pump is moving just as fast as the crank. Oil is far more likely to get aerated and not offer the lubricating and protective properties that it normally would.
Gotcha.
So another big thing I think about, especially in a race car, is the G-forces when you both corner, accelerate, and hit the brakes. If you can imagine, oil is just sloshing in your oil pan, and this will also affect oil lubrication, right? I mean, most commonly people will get a baffled oil pan just so oil can stay in place so the sump can pick it up. But at certain levels of grip, the pickup still may have a hard time picking up oil at certain levels of grip or certain cornering G-forces.
You just can't keep that oil in front of the pickup, right? Because it's just stuck on the side of the pan and won't even get to the pickup.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, actually, it's funny. It's funny you bring that up because we worked with a driver in Texas named Nick Engels. Nick, if you're out there, hi. I hope you're doing well. And we learned a lot from Nick because he probably told me some stuff that I can't tell you guys on camera, unfortunately. But one thing we did learn is when you rev a 4AG up to 11,000 RPM, you have to do a lot of special things in the oiling system. And one of the things that he learned through this process was that when you start to bring a 4AG oil pump up to a really high RPM, people talk about how that gear will disintegrate or shatter. And it's not just from the high RPM that's causing that. It's actually the high RPM in conjunction with having a momentary loss in oil supply. So if you can imagine, while you're cornering at the limit and you're at a really high RPM, if you get a momentary loss in pickup of the oil, you've got an air pocket that goes to the pump, and then when the oil comes back to the pump, it slams into it and will shatter the gears right there. So there's some workarounds. You can get like a Toyota upgraded oil pump gear, and that'll definitely help. But if you are making serious G-forces at seriously high RPM, you pretty much need to have a dry sump. And our understanding is if you're revving past 9,000 RPM on a regular basis, that's when you start to need to get into this kind of kit.
I was gonna say you can only do so much metal on metal at 9,000 RPM. You can only do so much.
Yeah.
So if you remember at the beginning of this video, MRP actually claims a 5 to 15 horsepower increase just by running a dry sump kit. And here's one reason why. Reduced pumping losses from the pistons, i.e. more power as oil is scavenged from the pan.
So you're saying that because you're keeping the oil away from the crankshaft, it's not getting in the way and getting frothed up and hitting that crankshaft as it's spinning?
Yeah, exactly. So if you can imagine like the volume of oil being churned up at high RPMs, 8, 9, 10,000 RPM, oil is still flying mid-air into the pan and causing losses because it's getting in the way of the crank, the pistons, the connecting rods. Whereas in a dry sump system, because it's being forcefully scavenged from the pan, you don't have those losses from unnecessary windage inside the crankcase.
And yeah, I mean, this is a big deal. This is part of the reason why people will knife edge a crank, and they'll make the arms of the crankshaft as narrow as possible so they can slice through the oil. But in this case, we've got a pump that's pulling that away from the crankshaft in the first place, so that is no longer an issue.
You know what's really wild for me is that in addition to having this dry sump pan, the pan's actually baffled on the inside too.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So you're really trying to get that oil to be picked up by the pump and also keep it away from the crankshaft as much as you can.
Yeah, exactly. Ah yes, here's one we talked about off camera. Increased block rigidity increases main bearing life at high RPM. How does that happen?
Yeah, so another downside to revving your 4AG or 7AG or 9AG engine at a really high RPM is the block. The block is very old, you guys. I think that block dates back to, I'm gonna say the early 80s or late 70s, in the 4AC variants. And they just weren't meant to be revving that high or have that kind of power output. But as we really push these engines to the limit, the bottom of the block becomes is not tied together very well, or at least as well as like a more modern high revving engine like a S2000 engine, for example. So what can you do to help keep the crankshaft from rubbing against the main bearings and distorting under load? One thing you can do is you can strengthen the bottom end. So some people will use a girdle, which is a large piece of steel that's machined very precisely to bolt up underneath the block and hold it together. That definitely helps. But this pan's also going to help too, because this is a really heavy gauge steel. You can see how thick it is here. We're looking at probably 1/4 of an inch on this plate, and this is quite rigid. So just this alone is going to help with the how flexible the bottom end of the block is.
Yeah, you Corolla guys probably know the stock oil pan you can probably bend with your hands.
Yeah, some stamped piece of steel, right?
Yeah. Another part of the claimed horsepower increase from this dry sump kit is actually the improved ring seal. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So as you guys know, on the pistons, there's rings, the piston rings on the pistons, and as you've got the combustion forces pushing on the rings, they are going to want to pull. They want to get pushed inwards away from the cylinder walls. So that's part of the reason why you get a lot of blow-by when you have a turbocharged car, is because all that pressure is actually pushing the rings away from the cylinder walls and letting that gas get into the oil, and out goes your dipstick, right? So one thing that can help is if you have with a dry sump kit, it's actually creating a vacuum underneath the rings, and so that vacuum will work against the combustion forces and push the rings against the cylinder walls and get you better sealing and better thermal efficiency, which means more power for you guys.
Yeah. Another thing is that the rings are being forced both ways, because if you think the piston's making pressure up, it's also making pressure on the way down. So that's why there's crankcase pressure, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And the crankcase pressure also does not help with ring seal. So another thing to consider with a dry sump system is increased oil capacity and increased oil temp control. So think about a wet sump system. A lot of these bigger baffled pans, you can only go so big of an oil pan because basically you run out of room, right? You can only make a pan so big before it hits something
Or
else
so
in the
deep,
engine.
right?
Yeah, or it hits the floor.
And all you guys like to run your curls really low. So that's a problem.
Yeah, so increasing your engine oil capacity and then also improved oil temp control with this kit. How can we improve oil temp control with a dry sump kit?
I don't know. Can you tell us? Because I honestly don't know.
Oh, really?
I feel like you would have less control because there's no thermostat.
So I think one part of increasing the oil capacity is
Yeah.
that you have more volume of oil to absorb the heat, right? So
Oh.
whether that's like the radiant heat from the block, or if you have this dry sump kit, you probably have an air-to-air oil cooler heat exchanger too, and there's more volume of oil in that system to more evenly distribute that heat.
So you have a better handle on keeping the temperatures lower.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So like every modification, there's always an upside and there's always a downside you have to consider, right?
What do you mean there's a downside?
I know we always like to think just spend the money and like everything's gonna be great, right? But with a lot of things, there's a balance that you have to pick. Like, and what are the pros and cons of this modification? So now we want to talk about some of the disadvantages of a dry sump kit.
Grant, this is crazy talk. I want to run this dry sump system in my street car.
Well, like with a lot of performance modifications that you do, there's advantages and there's certain disadvantages. And some of them may not be great for street use, and we'll talk about some of those reasons.
Yeah. So first of all, you guys probably already know, it's an expensive kit. This costs a lot. Is this really worth it for your street car? It definitely adds a lot of complexity to the system. Another thing is that because this mounts on the exhaust side of the system, you may have to make that compromise where like you have to get rid of your air conditioning. You have to run a custom power steering system, which MRP does offer, but again, just another level of complexity that you may not want. Weight is another thing. 6-liter oil tank, definitely going to add weight to the car. Same thing with all the additional plumbing and the rest of the dry sump system. Another disadvantage, requires additional oil and maintenance. So I'm very familiar with that because even if you run a big oil pan, all of a sudden your oil change is
What, 6 quarts now or something?
6-8 quarts.
6 to 8 quarts.
All of a sudden, all your oil changes become that much more expensive.
Yeah, and this has another belt, right? So that's one more belt to keep track of.
Yeah, one more belt.
Yeah.
Again, the maintenance, I think, I've never done it, but to change oil on a dry sump system might be more complex than your regular oil change also, which you may not want to deal with all the time on your street car. Speaking of everyday street car, may hurt everyday use. For example, oil can never come up to operating temp at, regular street operating speeds. So I'll give you guys a funny example. Mercedes-Benz once, a long time ago, offered one of their cars with a dry sump system, and they found out it actually hurt the cars. And why did it hurt the cars? Because the oil never came up to engine operating temp.
How'd they solve that?
So they actually just blocked off majority of the oil cooler.
Wow, and that was a factory fix, huh?
Factory Band-Aid fix.
Interesting.
This is the MRP Dry Sump Kit for 4AG and 7AG engines. Grant, I want to thank you for this opportunity to go over this kit with you and be able to, I'm actually kind of scared to touch most of this stuff.
Yeah, we were thrilled to have the opportunity to see these parts here, out of New Zealand and on the way to Japan. So we're just excited as you are.
Thank you, Barry at MRP, for making insane stuff.
Keeping that 4AG technology pushing forward.
Yeah. Couple members of our team who have done competitive motorsports commented that this is actually a very affordable kit, because comparative kits they have bought in the past will cost 5 figures or more. And then don't be dissuaded by the price of this kit, because everything in this kit's like of top quality. Like I can't believe there's a billet 3-stage pump in this kit for the price.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much if you have a serious engine build and you're racing, you're seeing a lot of really high G-forces, or you just want to have the sickest engine bay at the meet, this kit will check off on a lot of that criteria, and it's pretty much essential if you're revving consistently past 9,000 RPM. So it's really cool seeing this kit here, and yeah, I mean, I'm stoked that we could do this video and talk about the kit.
Thank you guys for watching. Again, thank you, Grant. It's been a pleasure reviewing this MRP Dry Sump Kit. I don't know if we're ever going to see another one in our lifetime.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. And thanks to both of you for having me on the video.
So thank you guys for watching. Remember to like and subscribe. I will leave a product link description in the description below. Yeah, thanks again for watching, you guys. We'll catch you next time.